Well, I don't know if there's one Israeli perspective, because as we know in Israel, there's always more than one opinion, as we know.
Honestly, I had no idea that.
I had no idea about it, right? But I think that from Israel's perspective, what happened in Europe and what was described as by Chancellor Scholz as a Zeitenwende, a historical change, a new era, is something that definitely has impacted on Israel's relation with Europe, because it's a I would say it's a post-end of history Europe that totally takes into account the threat of war on its continent, the largest military conflict since the end of World War II. And now, of course, you have this military cooperation between Russia and Iran. Now, we also know that Russia is trying to undermine the US-led order that was partially implemented after World War II, could not be fully implemented because of the Cold War and the competition between the US and the Soviet Union, and of course the fact that the Security Council was neutralized by the veto powers demanded by and obtained by Stalin. And this US-led order became possible only with the end of the Cold War. But today, Russia, it's been one of the objectives of Putin since he first came to power in 1999, and it started with the war in Chechnya, was to try to rebuild the Russian Empire. He's described the collapse of the Soviet Union as, quote unquote, the biggest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. And since the United States is Israel's strongest ally, this is of concern for Israel. Despite the fact that with the end of the Cold War, and especially with the war in Syria, the civil war in Syria, Israel has been able to build a relationship with Russia by which we coordinate our moves in the airspace of Syria. But it doesn't mean that the geopolitical interests of Israel and Russia don't clash. They do. And I think it's become clearer today. So in the beginning, as you know, Israel was a bit lukewarm about taking side in the war after Russia's aggression against Ukraine because of the fear of being blocked by Russia in the Syrian airspace. But I think that as Russia, increased the level and ferocity of its war crimes in Ukraine, as it upgraded its military cooperation with Iran, I think it's a no-brainer that obviously today I think Israel also has been increasing its support, its civilian support for Ukraine. And the last point is that Israel, we mentioned before NATO, right? As you know, a couple of years ago, President Macron of France described NATO as brain dead. So in our ALNET policy conference in Paris 2 weeks ago, we had a special panel on NATO. It was called From Brain Dead to No-Brainer. Right, so Putin, of course, has recreated, I would say, NATO, and this creates also new opportunities for Israel. As there is a need for security in Europe, Israel's military and intelligence expertise is in high demand, but also in terms of energy security. The mistake that has been made, and you mentioned before, of basically answering Putin's aggression in 2014 in Crimea by building Nord Stream 2, with what is called in German the Russlandversteher, those who understand Russia. I think everybody today in Germany understands this was a mistake. And this need to diversify Europe's natural gas imports also creates new opportunities for Israel. Remind you that an agreement was signed between the European Commission and Israel nearly a year ago for Israel to supply natural gas to the European Union. So I think this really opens new opportunities for Israel.